Here's a look at the card I'll be creating today in the video. This is using the Delightful Blooms stamp set with Gina K Designs. I'm going to start by heat embossing my image onto a piece of watercolor paper. Now this is the Fabriano Artistico Extra White. This comes in a 5x7 block that I like to use. This is just the particular paper that I've grown accustomed to. It is made for watercoloring, so it will hold water, which is one of the reasons that I chose it. A lot of people will use Bristol Smooth cardstock when using their zigs. That is a really good paper if you want to blend from marker to marker, but for watercoloring purposes, I really do like this paper. So I'm using the Gina K Designs embossing ink, stamping that twice using my Mindy 2.0, making sure I get a really good impression on here. And then I'm going to sprinkle on the champagne embossing powder from Gina K Designs. I'm holding my cardstock flat, kind of giving it a little shake when I put the embossing powder on, and then sprinkling the rest back into my container. And after I'm sure my heat tool is really nice and hot, I'll bring it to the paper and melt that embossing powder. Now, since I am going to be doing some watercoloring, I'm going to tape my cardstock down to a board. Not even sure anymore where I got this, probably just a regular cutting board somewhere in your local store. And I'm using just some blue painter's tape to hold that down. And then you can see I'm holding just the very edges. I'm not being real careful if it's straight or not because I'm going to end up trimming this down later on. But I do want to hold this in place. This helps so that my paper doesn't warp up and it'll stay flat when I'm watercoloring. Now, a couple other supplies that I like to have on hand other than my zigs is going to be a water brush pen. Now, this is definitely preference. I'm using an Altenew water brush pen. I think this is the medium size. I also have a paper towel and a little glass of water. Now I'm going to start off by coloring in the leaves. I find that to be the easiest way because then it's easier for me to find where my petals are. So I'm starting off by laying down some color with the greens. I will have all of the colors listed at the top of the screen. So just coloring in a little bit of that green, and then I have my paintbrush wet, not dripping wet, just damp, and I'm going to drag that color to the rest of the leaf. I'm doing this as kind of a underlaying color. I know there's specific art terms for this, but it's just laying down color first. So it doesn't have to be perfect. Now you could definitely leave it like this and have that be your completed artwork if you just wanted one layer, but I plan on layering up these colors, which is really where the magic comes in when you're coloring with your zigs. So one of the first tips I want to share when coloring with these zig markers is start light. It's always easiest to start with a light color first in any type of coloring format or anything you use. You can always add color. It's really hard to take it away. Although there is a slight exception to watercoloring. You can kind of erase mistakes with your water brush when it comes to the watercoloring. That's if you have little slip-ups outside of your lines. But for the most part, my first tip is start light. Now this way of watercoloring is pretty much what I do through all of my petals. To get the different variations of color is a matter of how much water you're adding to your brush, how much color you're adding down to your paper, and also the different layers of color that you're going to add. So after I have that first light color down, you can see this does look pretty as is, but if you want to add some more depth to it, you can add another color. Now I forgot how deep of a green this was, so I added a little bit too much here in the first one, but they still all really work out. So I added that darker green right down at the bottom. I have a damp brush, and then I'm pulling that color out towards the tip. Now what I'm doing off screen there is I am either dabbing off that extra pigment or I'm dipping my brush in the little water cup that I have there. And why I'm doing that is because I want the color to get lighter as I'm going out towards the edge of the leaf. I don't want to bring all of that pigment with me because this is a really dark color. It's very pigmented. It's going to take over the entire leaf, and I wanted that lighter color to really show through. So you'll notice that throughout the video that I'm wiping off on my paper towel there, or if my hand disappears off screen, it's because I'm rinsing that pigment off of my brush. So that's going to lead me to tip number 2 is find a brush that you like and stick with it. Keep the experimenting for another day when you're comfortable with coloring with your zigs. This happens to be, for whatever reason, the brush that I'm accustomed to. It's a matter of how much water is held in the tip of the brush, or maybe it's the size of the tip of the brush. But this is just what I've grown to get used to and comfortable with. So that is my tip. Second tip for you is once you start kind of watercoloring, stick with it until you're really comfortable, and then you can move on and experiment with, maybe some different brushes. Now, if you're working with watercoloring and you're finding you're just not getting the coverage that you want, or it's not as fine of a tip, or maybe you need a thicker tip, then definitely venture out and look for something else. But when you're kind of getting used to this, try and stick with the same one. And I think that'll really help you, and you'll grow to learn how your brush handles the watercoloring. Now, you may also notice that this is a water brush pen, but I'm not using it in the typical way. Normally, you would fill this pen with water and just squeeze the barrel of the pen when you want more water. But unfortunately, I just mess projects up when I do that. I squeeze too hard or not enough. So I like the tip, I like the feel of it in my hand, and I just add water to it by dipping it in my clean glass that I have off on the side. So now you can see I moved on to coloring my flower. Very similar to the leaves that I did, I'm adding a light color down first and dragging that color out to the ends. Now the middle one, I literally just kind of scribbled all over and spread it out all over. I just wanted that light base color. And now what I want to show you here is you'll be able to see when it's still wet. So see where it's kind of shiny on those petals? That is still wet. So I don't want to color on that just yet. I'm going to add another layer to this, but I'm going to skip those petals for right now because it's still wet. So I'm going to move down to that bottom flower, and I'm going to start adding a darker color here. So I believe this is just called pink. And I also do have the numbers of the brush pens, brush markers, and the names over on my blog too. So I'm adding a darker pink to this, and same format, adding that color and dragging it out, but I'm making sure I'm not dragging all of that pigment out to the ends. I still want that light pink to show through, and you can see how it's really giving these flowers a highlight area, adding dimension to them, and it's really fun to see the colors mixing. I moved up and was coloring the second smaller flower that's towards the top there, doing the same thing, adding that pink and spreading that out. Now that middle flower was actually really quite hard for me. There's a lot of little spaces in here, so it was really hard to leave a highlight area in here. So I'm just adding the pink. I'm not going to add any other color to this. What you could do afterwards, I didn't on this card, but what you could do is take a white colored pencil and add little highlight areas to the very edges of the flower. If you happen to not leave enough of a highlight area, you could add that with some colored pencil. That's always kind of a nice trick you can do afterwards. Now, since that big one was taking me so long and I decided to just leave it pink, I'm going to come in and add purple to these other two flowers just to kind of give it some contrast to my large pink flower. And that one is the same process I've been doing through the entire video, but I'm not dragging it out as far and I'm not adding as much. And you can see what a gorgeous tone of color this is taking on. The purple just really added a lot to those pink flowers. Once all of my images are colored in, I'm going to come in with a gray brown, and I'm going to add just kind of a shadow uh, area around the entire image. Now, my other tip I have for you is be patient with yourself. Doing something like this, it takes time and practice. I'm definitely no professional at it, but I enjoy it and I feel I'm getting better each time that I do it. Now here I wanted to show you when you're taking off your painter's tape, you want to pull the tape back on itself very slowly. I didn't have any rips on this, so if I wanted to keep this as a card front, I certainly could, but I knew I wanted to stick with an A2 size card. Once I've let this dry for a while and it's completely dry, I'm going to use the Master Layouts 2 from Gina Designs, hold it in place with purple tape once I get the perfect alignment on what part I want to die cut out. And I'm going to run this through my die cut machine, but to protect my surface, I'm adding a piece of copy paper over the top. That's protecting my watercoloring and also my die cutting plates. So once I run this through, I'll have the perfect area die cut out of my image. Now off screen, I did go ahead and add this to a 4¼ by 5½ inch piece of white cardstock, and I heat embossed a sentiment off of this same Delightful Blooms stamp set, heat embossed in champagne embossing powder to match my card, and it's on the black cardstock, and I'm just adhering a few jewels around the sentiment using my Connect glue. And that finishes up the card for today. I hope this was helpful and the tips will help you in your watercoloring. All of my supplies will be listed down below.